Before this story twists into the man you think you know, understand this. Severus Snape was shaped not by love or cruelty, but by choices woven with regret, ambition, and quiet violence. Stay, and you'll see the Snape buried beneath every retelling. The one built from secrets, betrayals, and consequences that refused to die. Greetings, traveler. You've found your way back to the Silver Quill Corner. I am Grayfen, the story keeper. Long ago, when I was bound to an ancient wizarding family, I learned that stories carry a magic older than time itself. Here we drift through wizarding tales shaped from every shadowed corner of magic. Gothic myths, lost histories, and quiet retellings inspired by the magical universe of Harry Potter. If the murmur of quills and the echo of old corridors bring you peace, press like, subscribe. The bells have been heard across the world tonight. Tell me, Keeper, from what city, realm, or corner of the world are you listening? I'd love to know how far these stories have reached. Before he ever became a spy or a weapon, Severus Snape made one choice so catastrophic it bent the entire war around it. A girl by the riverbank. His voice, sharpened by humiliation, a slur that split the moment clean in two, and Lily Evans walked away. Long before James Potter ever mocked him, Severus had already begun slipping toward darker halls, drawn to friends who spoke of blood purity with polished certainty, drawn to spells designed to wound, drawn to ideologies Lily begged him to abandon. There are years of his life no one speaks about. Whispers of rituals behind locked doors, curses that left stains on skin, nights spent hunting in the Dark Lord's service. Voldemort didn't lure Snape. He recognized him, a clever, wounded prodigy whose brilliance tilted too easily toward the dangerous. When he returned to Hogwarts as a professor, he carried that past like a shadow stitched to his heels. Students feared him. Colleagues avoided him. The castle had its doubts, and the world had its questions. A former Death Eater teaching children? Trust was rationed, friendship was non-existent, and through it all, Lily remained the one memory he couldn't release. She had been the first person to show him warmth, and the last person to see the good in him before he buried it. Her absence became the anchor he dragged everywhere. His love didn't save him. Clinging to a ghost, because letting go meant admitting he'd driven her away long before Voldemort ever did. The prophecy began as almost nothing, a fragment overheard in a cheap pub. He carried it to Voldemort with the cold efficiency of a man proving his worth, not pausing to wonder who the child was or why the words mattered. Back then, serving the Dark Lord felt like purpose, brutal, hollow, and intoxicating. Snape moved through those ranks intensely, offering information because being needed, even by a monster, felt safer than being invisible. And then he heard the name, Lily. He pleaded with a desperation so sharp it stripped him bare. He didn't ask for the boy's life. He didn't care about the man she chose. He pleaded for Lily alone, the last piece of his childhood, the last kindness he ever knew. He had delivered her death into Voldemort's hands, a judgment Snape would carry for the rest of his life. But the bargain was struck anyway. Snape would protect the child destined to end the war, not out of faith or prophecy or nobility, but because he couldn't bear to let Lily's story end with his mistake. And fate, as always, offered no mercy to a man who asked for it far too late. A man wedged between two sides, carrying secrets sharp enough to wound either one. Torchlight stretched across the dungeon corridor in thin, uneasy lines. Shadows tilting like memories he'd spent years trying not to look at. He had walked these halls as a boy full of hunger and hurt. He returned now as a man of 21, shaped by consequences. The dungeon classroom waited for him. Silent, orderly, unforgiving shelves lined with bottled danger watched from the walls. In those early years, before Harry Potter ever set foot in the castle, Snape carved out a reputation that spread through corridors faster than gossip. First years learned to fear the scrape of his boots. Older students whispered about the precision of his cruelty, how he could find a weakness faster than he could mark a parchment. He mocked trembling voices. He humiliated mistakes. He dismantled confidence with a single raised brow. And in a flash of red hair or a pair of green eyes, the past clawed its way back. Worse were the moments when the marauders resurfaced, a name scribbled in a margin, Lupin's quiet laugh in a doorway, a joke too close to the ones that once broke him. His composure snapped then, fast and feral, like a blade remembering how to cut. Cold silence became jagged fury in an instant, voice sharp, breath unsteady, old humiliation flooding him as if he were 15 again. Students never understood. They only saw the eruption, the venom, the lightning strike temper. But beneath it lived something older and uglier, a childhood wound that never healed, reacting every time the past dared to speak his name. Snape refused to drown in memory. He shoved it beneath the cold surface of his mind and locked it there with Occlumency's unbreakable discipline. Outside the classroom, Snape's other life stirred. The dark marks slept under his sleeve like a half-healed wound, quiet, never dormant. Some nights it prickled and he would stop in the dim corridors, listening for a summons that didn't come. The Death Eaters had scattered after Voldemort's fall, but shadows don't die. They wait. Snape followed them into pubs that reeked of secrets, across fields choked with cursed fog, down alleys where old loyalties lingered like rot. He listened. He reported. He walked the line between two worlds and belonged to neither. Autumn crept over Hogwarts in slow, deliberate breaths, gold edging the forbidden forest, mist gathering over the lake like something waiting to exhale. And in the dungeons, Snape felt the shift, subtle, electric, the early tremor of a storm long before lightning touches the ground. 10 years had passed beneath his black robes, 10 years of sitting apart in the great hall while colleagues shared laughter he refused to reach for. Minerva's wary glances, Flitwick's careful courtesy, Sprout's quiet offerings left outside his door. These became the strange constellation of his days. Even Hagrid's low, grudging grunt of acknowledgement felt like the closest thing to respect he'd been granted in years. Beyond the walls, the world attempted to clean itself. Trials ended. Names were rewritten. Former Death Eaters slipped into polished ministry chairs as if their hands had never held wands at screaming throats. But Snape remembered. Every night, every face, every choice. The dark mark under his sleeve pulsed faintly, a slow, poisonous heartbeat reminding him that Voldemort's absence was nothing like peace. Then winter came, and with it, a rumor, thin, cold, and dangerous, a mark in the sky, faint but unmistakable, magic stirring where it should have stayed dead, something old waking. Snape's arm burned, a sharp, unmistakable throb beneath the skin. The moment Harry Potter stepped into the Great Hall, something inside Severus Snape went still. The first years spilled in with their usual noise, robes crooked, whispers buzzing, lanterns shaking with nervous excitement, 100 new lives forming their first memories. Snape saw none of them. He was watching the doorway. A small boy appeared. Slight ruffled hair, nothing extraordinary at first glance, and then the candlelight caught the scar. And then the eyes. Lily's eyes. Green as the summers she once shared with him. Green as the memory that had carved him hollow. Harry felt the air shift, though he had no idea why. Then came the second blow, harsher, older, venomous in a way time had never dulled. James. In the hair, in the posture, in the easy, unthinking confidence of a boy who had never been unwanted. Two ghosts wearing one child's face, Lily's light and James's shadow stitched into the same heartbeat. No 11-year-old deserves to walk into someone else's war. But Snape had never learned how to separate past from present, or grief from bitterness. He watched Harry be sorted with the stillness of a man refusing to drown in a memory. The hall erupted in cheers. Candles swayed. The future clicked into place like fate finding its mark, and Snape's jaw tightened. Because he already knew. The boy's arrival was not a beginning. That winter, Snape stalked Professor Quirrell through Hogwarts like a man chasing the shadow of his own mistakes. Slipping into the forbidden corridor where the castle hid its most dangerous secret, Hagrid's three-headed beast snarled in the dark, its thunderous breath shaking the stone, a living wall of muscle only someone with his wild tenderness could train. Professor Sprout's devil's snare writhed like a living trap, every coil a reminder of her mastery over plants that obeyed no one else. Flitwick's enchanted keys streaked through the air like silver razors, delicate, lethal, impossibly precise, crafted by a charms prodigy who once dueled at champion level. McGonagall's wizard's chess roared to life, stone pieces slamming into each other with bone-cracking force. Strategy, discipline, and transfiguration brilliance fused into one ruthless battleground. And Quirrell's troll lay crumpled in the corner, the stench of it still clinging to the chamber, the only piece of the gauntlet that didn't belong to brilliance, but to something darker. Hiding behind his trembling smile, every step whispered the same truth. Quirrell wasn't simply meddling with school magic. Something older, colder, and horribly familiar clung to him, something Snape had once sworn himself to. Then came his trial, a chamber washed in cold blue fire, 7 bottles gleaming on a stone table like a puzzle designed to kill. No wand, no spells, only intellect. The same ruthless logic he'd honed as a boy inventing curses just to survive. He moved with the precision of someone who knew mistakes had consequences, real ones, and when he stepped through the flames unscathed, he understood the truth. This wasn't a test of courage. It was a test of discipline, a trial built for a mind sharpened by fear, a mind exactly like his. The second year cracked open with chaos, and with it came Gilderoy Lockhart, Hogwarts' newest fraud, wrapped in lilac robes and self-promotion. At one staff meeting, he delivered a dramatic lecture on proper potion technique, insisting powdered hellebore must be massaged for best results. Snape didn't even look up from his tea. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Do enlighten us on how one massages powder." Lockhart's smile flickered. Then he carried on as if nothing had happened. Snape didn't bother disguising the expression that followed, the kind that could curdle potions at 20 paces. He had seen through the man in seconds, but beneath the foolishness, the castle trembled. Whispers slithered through the walls. A creature of legend hunted the pipes. Students fell petrified, one after another. Snape walked the wreckage like a man assessing storm ruin. Then the third year reopened an older wound, a friend carrying apology, a monster beneath each moon, and a fugitive the world believed was hunting Harry Potter. At the center sat Wolfsbane, a potion only a rare few could brew. Snape crafted it with surgical precision, aconite hissing, silver threads stirred through moonlight, not for thanks, but because duty demanded brilliance. He taught one defense class that year, 1 hour in the room he'd wanted since he was a young man. The subject he understood better than anyone alive, and he weaponized it. No lesson plan, no gentle introduction, just one assignment dropped like a blade. How to identify a werewolf. Symptom cycles, magical signatures, a roadmap of Lupin's secret disguised as homework, quiet, precise, inevitable. Students groaned at the length, rolled their eyes at the footnotes. They had no idea they were reading a warning, a coded alarm wrapped in academic language, a prophecy for the year ahead, written by a man who knew what monsters looked like long before they ever had fangs. And then, the Shrieking Shack. A rupture in Snape's life so violent it felt pre-written. a magical map that showed Harry sprinting headlong into danger, Sirius Black behind him, the same Sirius who once dangled him by his ankles above a laughing crowd, the same Sirius who pointed a 12-year-old boy toward the mouth of a werewolf for a joke. Snape felt something old and venom-slick ignite. He tore down the hill, plunged beneath the whomping willow, stormed through the tunnel with years of fury snapping at his heels, and burst into the shack like a curse cast too hard. Sirius, filthy, furious, unforgiven Remus, trembling on the edge of a monstrous transformation. Harry, a child standing in the epicenter of wounds he didn't know he'd inherited. Snape didn't see innocence. He saw ghosts in grown bodies, James's laughter slashing through memory, Sirius's cruelty replaying behind his eyes, the humiliation that carved scars down to the bone, ghosts now standing beside the boy he'd sworn, in blood and guilt, to protect. His mask cracked, not slipped, cracked. 10 years of restraint shattering in a single violent breath. And then came the blow that broke him. Harry, Ron, Hermione, 3 children who aimed their wands at him, not with malice, but with blind, frantic loyalty, the same loyalty the marauders once used like a weapon. Their spell hit him like betrayal given shape. He lay there winded, staring up at 3 young faces lit with fear and determination, echoes of James's defiance, Sirius's recklessness, Lily's courage, all twisted back against him. He always lost where the marauders were concerned, even when the marauders weren't the ones casting the spells. By dawn, the truth had fractured, Sirius had escaped, Lupin had transformed, and Snape walked out of the shrieking shack hollow. Rage curdled into something bitterer than justice. The dark mark, silent for over a decade, twitched beneath Snape's sleeve. Then it pulsed. Then it burned. A heat so sharp it felt like something was clawing its way back into the world through his skin. The Triwizard Tournament arrived draped in celebration, but Snape saw the hollowness underneath. Magic clung to the goblet like static. The air hummed in the corridors, and Moody walked the castle with a paranoia so expertly performed it almost hid the wrongness radiating off him. Almost. Snape watched him constantly, the flask, the habits, the twitch behind the eyes, because something about the man felt borrowed. The year spiraled fast. Whispers turned to fear, fear turned to dread. And when Harry reappeared, clutching a dead boy in a flash of green-stained horror, that night Snape climbed the moving staircase to Dumbledore's office with a silence that scraped the walls. He rolled up his sleeve before anyone asked. The dark mark wasn't pale and faded anymore. It was black, alive, a summons pressed into flesh. Fudge recoiled, Dumbledore's jaw tightened, the world tilted, and Snape gave his report with a sharp, surgical calm that didn't waver once. Hours later, when the castle slept in shock, Snape left Hogwarts grounds the way a man walks into a battlefield he already knows he won't escape clean. He moved through the night like a shadow retracing old sins, straight toward the circle of robed figures waiting for him. They surrounded him, old faces, old masks, old loyalties he had killed but never buried. They hissed questions, demanded allegiance, spat accusations. Snape didn't flinch, didn't sweat, didn't break. His occlumency, the one discipline he had mastered with absolute brutality, held the line like iron. Every thought sealed, every fear buried, every motive wrapped so tightly that even Voldemort's gaze slid across his mind like a knife that couldn't find purchase. He stood before the Dark Lord with empty hands and a steady voice, not pleading, not trembling, just calculating exactly what to say and exactly what to withhold. By dawn, he walked away without a mark deeper than the one he arrived with, a miracle to some, a warning to others, a promise of war to all. The world thought the tournament had ended. It hadn't. It had opened a door, and Snape had stepped straight into the fire. The year didn't begin with a whisper. It began with a chokehold. A ministry decree arrived dressed in pink bows and authoritarian sugar, and overnight Hogwarts shifted from a sanctuary to a gilded cage. Dolores Umbridge drifted through the corridors with a smile glazed in venom, her rules multiplying like a sickness the castle itself tried to spit out. Snape watched her with that dangerous, surgical stillness of his, not calm, not passive, calculating. The quiet inhale before violence. She attempted to question him once. Her quill hovered, her lips twitched. Snape looked at her the way a predator considers which bone will snap first. She never approached him again, but Snape didn't fight her the way the students wished he would. He fought her the way a double agent must. Antidotes slipped into teacups before her, detentions carved permanent scars. Warnings layered into tone instead of words. Protections disguised as cruelty. Detentions reshaped, punishments redirected, corridors accidentally patrolled at the right moment. And beneath the surface, Voldemort's demands began to tighten like wire. Reports delivered through shadows, meetings at the edge of apparition-darkened fields, summons called by the Dark Mark's sudden pulse, a reminder that he was expected to serve two masters while betraying both. The tasks grew sharper, riskier, darker. Names to watch, alliances to test, lies to plant, truths to offer in pieces small enough to satisfy without exposing the war he was secretly propping up. This was no longer just about Lily, no longer a vow born from grief. What Snape carried now was bigger, heavier, the weight of being the only man who could stand in both worlds without collapsing. Dumbledore didn't ask Snape to teach Harry Occlumency, he ordered him. And Snape, a man who could barely say the boy's name without old bitterness rising like bile, suddenly had to train him in the one branch of magic that demanded total emotional exposure. Snape entered each lesson like a man walking into a battlefield, jaw locked, eyes hollow, wand already raised. Harry entered like a boy who didn't understand he was stepping into someone else's war. Snape didn't ease him in. He struck, hard. Legislamancy hit Harry like a blunt force trauma to the mind. Memories exploding, emotions ripping to the surface, thoughts dragged into the light without mercy. Snape watched him stumble, panting, blinking back humiliation. That should have satisfied him. But it didn't. Because every time those green eyes met his, something fractured beneath Snape's ribs, something he buried decades ago. Harry fought back. He shouldn't have. The moment Harry fired a shield spell at him, Snape snapped not in anger, in fear. Fear of what Harry might see if that shield ever turned the wrong way. Harry saw it all. Snape dangling upside down, exposed scrawny knees and threadbare trousers on display, Lily's gasp. James's laughter, cruelty sharp as sunlight. The slur that shattered the only friendship Snape ever had. It was the moment Snape became who he would be forever, and Harry watched it like a stranger peering through a window. Snape didn't simply throw Harry out. He erupted. The walls shook, glass rattled. His voice cracked with a kind of rage you only hear from someone whose soul has just been dragged naked into the open. He trembled, actually trembled, the way a man does when humiliation hits an old scar so deep it bleeds all over again. Grimmauld Place wasn't a headquarters, it was a pressure cooker, a house packed with old wars, wearing order badges, and every time Snape stepped through the door, the atmosphere shifted. He arrived only to deliver intelligence, sharp, concise, and colder than the Black family silver. He never stayed longer than necessary, just long enough for Harry to realize Snape wasn't merely a teacher, he was a battlefield asset, and Sirius, trapped inside the house that ruined him, bristled every time Snape appeared, one man confined by walls, the other free to walk into danger. Their hatred, ancient, personal, unsolved, cracked like static through the room. Snape's disdain was precise, Sirius's fury was feral, and Harry, stuck between them, finally saw it. Snape was fighting a war Sirius could only watch from behind a door that wouldn't let him leave. Near the end of the year, the war shifted beneath everyone's feet. Snape juggled 3 fronts at once, passing Dumbledore intelligence, feeding Voldemort carefully measured half-truths, and steering order strategy from the shadows. Every move carried risk. None allowed hesitation. And then the prophecy re-emerged. The same prophecy he had once leaked in a moment of blind ambition, the one that named Harry, destroyed Lily's life, and set the entire war in motion. Voldemort demanded it. Not out of curiosity, but obsession. Snape understood that better than anyone. When Harry vanished from Hogwarts chasing visions he couldn't interpret, Snape's warning, subtle but precise, pushed the only adults available toward the Department of Mysteries. He didn't join them. He couldn't. His absence kept his cover breathing. What happened next tore the year in half. The Ministry erupted into chaos. The prophecy shattered beyond recovery. The children fought like soldiers, far too young for the title, and Sirius fell through the veil, gone before Snape even reached the scene. Harry came back to Hogwarts wrecked with grief and fury. Harry stormed past him, convinced Snape felt nothing. Later, behind a closed office door, the truth slipped through the cracks for just a moment. A single tremor in his hands, a breath that shuddered and died in his throat. Then the mask returned. Another loss added to the quiet ledger he kept in the dark, unseen and unspoken. Another reminder that keeping Harry alive never stopped the world from taking everyone else. By year's end, Snape stood in the one place no man survives for long. Trusted by Voldemort, depended on by Dumbledore, tolerated by the Order, and despised by Harry. Each allegiance pulled at him like a separate blade. Each truth carved him a little thinner, and the war, merciless as ever, was about to demand more of Severus Snape than any one man should ever be expected to give. That's when Narcissa Malfoy slipped through Snape's door, trembling beneath her elegance, with Bellatrix prowling behind her, suspicion glittering in her eyes, her smile curved like a blade meant to test his every breath. They spoke of Draco, the task, the danger, the impossible mission dressed up as honor Snape already knew. Dumbledore had told him months earlier, but hearing the terror in Narcissa's voice, hearing a mother beg a man she barely trusted, struck somewhere old in him. Snape knew exactly what it meant to be young, frightened, and valuable to the wrong master. The unbreakable vow coiled around his arm in shimmering bands, tightening under Bellatrix's watchful gaze, hungry for the slightest hesitation. Protect the boy, guide him, finish the job if he couldn't. When the magic snapped shut, it didn't feel like a new burden, just the next weight added to a life already built from them. Teaching defense should have felt like victory. Instead, Snape taught like a man bracing students for a storm none of them could see. Lessons stripped to bone and blade, counter-curses demonstrated with unnerving precision, truth delivered without padding, mercy or apology. Students whispered that he'd grown colder. He didn't bother correcting them. They were never meant to like him, only to survive what was coming, and still the distance held. No trust, no warmth, no pretense of camaraderie. Snape didn't need any of it. He only needed them prepared. Draco moved through the castle like someone crossing a tightrope in the dark, brittle, terrified, wearing confidence like armor that cracked if you looked too closely. Snape steered him as much as the vow allowed, subtle redirects, quiet interventions, never soft enough for Draco to recognize the rescue. The vow permitted guidance, not comfort. Then came the bathroom. Sectum Sempra split him open, a curse Snape had forged in the reckless fury of his youth. Seeing it carved across a child's body hit him harder than any hex. He dropped beside Draco instantly, voice low and urgent as he worked the counter-curse he'd invented for wounds he never expected to see again. Harry staggered back, horrified, and Snape walked away with a truth he despised. The shadows he created as a boy still had the power to draw blood. Storm winds clawed the sky as Snape climbed the astronomy tower. Each step heavier than the last, each breath a countdown. He already knew Dumbledore waited at the edge, the curse blooming through his arm like spreading ice. Draco stood opposite him, wand trembling, terror spilling from him in waves. And then the old man said Snape's name, soft, steady, final. In that instant, the world snapped into brutal clarity. To save Draco, he had to damn himself. To keep Harry alive, he had to kill the one man who had ever believed he could be more than the worst thing he'd done. There was no room left for fear, no room left for hesitation, only the last step of a path he'd chosen years ago. Snape lifted his wand. A flash of green tore the night open. Dumbledore fell, and the castle seemed to inhale sharply as though something ancient inside it had just been severed. In that silent second, Snape felt everything break, but none of it showed on his face. His mask stayed intact. His heart did not. Snape didn't linger on the tower. He vanished into the storm of screams and spells, cloak snapping behind him like a blade cutting through the dark. Death Eaters scattered in every direction, curses flying, stone exploding, the castle roaring like a wounded thing. And then Harry saw him. Grief turned Harry feral. He bolted after Snape with a sound that barely qualified as human. A cry ripped from the center of everything he'd just lost. He fired curses wildly, bolts of red, sparks of gold, a Cruciatus attempt sharp enough to blister the air. Snape swatted them aside without raising his voice. He moved with infuriating calm, elegant blocks, perfect shields, never once aiming back at the boy trying to kill him. Because Dumbledore's last command was carved into him like a brand. Do not harm him, not ever. Around them, chaos exploded. Greyback lunged out of the smoke. Snape shoved him back with a single slash of magic, snarling that Harry was for the Dark Lord, a lie sharp enough to freeze the other Death Eaters mid-strike. The Carrows hurled hexes meant to kill. Snape deflected them all, redirecting danger away from the boy sprinting at his heels. Harry didn't see it, didn't care. He wanted blood. He hurled Sectum Sempra. Snape's expression flickered. Not fear, not anger, but something like a wound reopening. Before he blocked it with a spell so swift it cracked like thunder. They tore across the grounds, past burning grass and falling sparks from Hagrid's collapsing hut. Snape never once broke stride. Harry screamed the word that cut deeper than any curse. Coward! Snape stopped spun. A storm made flesh. His control ruptured. The fury that erupted from him wasn't Professor Rage or Death Eater fury. It was the howl of a man who had been dying in silence for years. He roared back with a voice that shook the night apart, not at Harry, but at every sacrifice no one had ever seen. And then he was gone. Through the gates, into the darkness, disapparating with the Death Eaters in a crack of thunder, leaving Harry kneeling in the ruins, breath heaving, wand trembling, heart broken clean in half, and Snape, still protecting the boy who hated him, disappeared into the only place left for him, the shadows. By summer's end, the world had reshaped itself around his silhouette. Voldemort claimed him as one of his own. Dumbledore lay dead by his wand. The Order wouldn't speak his name without venom, and Hogwarts whispered it like a curse passed mouth to mouth in the corridors. And Harry hated him with a purity that almost felt earned. Snape had become the one thing no war can function without, a man everyone needs and no one trusts. He stood in the center of two armies, loathed by both, bound by one vow, driven by a promise only he remembered. The plan was still breathing. The castle felt different the moment he returned. Not hostile, Hogwarts had never turned on him, but alert, as if the stone had witnessed the tower and understood the cost. Snape walked its halls as headmaster, a title that felt more like a dare than an honor. Students stared at him with wide, frightened eyes, the staff with sharpened suspicion, and the Carrows strutted through the corridors like animals who believed cruelty counted as authority. He carried another weight into the job, the memory of the battle on the astronomy tower, the stray curse that tore George Weasley's ear, a mistake in the chaos, and one that followed him like a quiet indictment. The Carrows weren't teachers, they were thugs with wands. Cruel for sport, obedient for fear, delighted by the authority they'd never earn on merit. Blood quills, hexes disguised as lessons, humiliation passed off as discipline. And Snape, silent, expression unreadable at the podium, looked like he condoned every second of it. But that was the lie the Dark Lord needed beneath it. Snape turned the school into a covert battleground. Detentions abruptly reassigned. Across staff meetings, McGonagall's glare hit him like a stun spell. Furious, betrayed, unyielding, Snape returned it with level calm, a single message buried in that frost-bitten stare: watch me, not them. At night, portraits traveled messages through the walls. Students who went missing in Carrow reports reappeared days later in unused rooms stocked with blankets and food. The Carrows blamed each other. Snape encouraged that. And still, Voldemort's demands grew heavier. Every meeting was a trap he had to survive. Every report stitched from lies, calibrated just precisely enough to pass. Then came the Gringotts news. A break-in, a stolen Horcrux. Dumbledore's plan was moving again. He climbed to the headmaster's office, where the portraits pretended to sleep. One pair of painted eyes never did. Dumbledore's portrait listened as Snape delivered the update. Clipped, precise, efficient. But when Snape revealed that the sword of Gryffindor had been replaced with a ministry fake, the portrait's expression shifted, softened, understood. Snape didn't wait for praise. He never did. But when the portrait asked how he intended to get the real sword to Harry, Snape answered with a spell instead of words. A silver doe stepped from his wand. Lily's doe, Lily's shape, a memory given form. The room fell silent. Even the portraits seemed to hold their breath. Dumbledore's painted face broke, not with pity, but with the weight of understanding Snape had never wanted witnessed. Snape looked away first. Harry followed, unaware of who led him, unaware of the danger circling with every step. Snape left the sword of Gryffindor beneath the ice like a secret offering to fate, vanishing from the clearing before Harry even broke the tree line. Helping the boy was dangerous. Being seen helping him was fatal. He slipped back toward the castle with the quiet certainty that his purpose was nearly spent. By dawn, Hogwarts itself felt changed, uneasy, restless, as though the stones were bracing for something they had sensed long before any human had. The air carried a hum of rebellion. Students moved like embers waiting for the spark. And then it hit Snape, an unmistakable pulse rising through the walls. Cold and absolute, Harry Potter had returned. The war wasn't approaching anymore. It was inside. The fragile balance Snape had maintained all year. Lies layered over lies, subtle protections hidden beneath cruelty, snapped taut in an instant, and fate wasted no time testing him. McGonagall found him first, a silhouette of fury in a corridor drenched in moonlight, her wand already raised, breath sharp with righteous rage. She believed he had harmed her colleague. She believed he was the enemy, and Snape, who had spent months preventing exactly the horrors she thought he embraced, met her spells with a control so precise it looked like defiance. He redirected instead of attacking, shielded instead of striking, every movement calculated to avoid revealing where his loyalty truly lay. Flitwick and Sprout arrived within seconds, joining her without hesitation. 3 of Hogwarts' finest, united against the man who had sacrificed more for the school than any of them knew. Snape could have overpowered them. But victory would have exposed his mission. Defeat would have doomed it. so he chose a third option. With a single explosive burst of magic, he blew apart the window behind him and vanished into the storming night, leaving the Carrows stunned and the professors uninjured. Even in retreat, he protected the school from its own defenders. And then came the final summons. Voldemort sent for him in the dead of night, calling him to the Shrieking Shack, the place where Snape's childhood terrors, once hid beneath floorboards, now twisted into a stage for his undoing. The air inside was stale with memories he'd never escaped. Nagini floated in her spectral cage, her coils brushing the glass with a patience that felt almost ceremonial. Voldemort spoke of wands, of allegiance, of power stolen and reclaimed. His words slithered through the room like cold fog, and in them Snape heard the truth he had prayed he would never face. The Dark Lord believed the Elder Wand belonged to him, and to command it fully, Snape had to die. It hit him with a clarity fiercer than terror. He wasn't being punished. He wasn't being exposed. He was being discarded, as cleanly and casually as any tool Voldemort had outgrown. Every sacrifice he had made, every night spent lying to one master, every day spent hated by the other, every cruelty committed to keep children alive, every step of the tightrope he'd walked alone, all of it was about to end, not in triumph, not even in purpose, but because of the Dark Lord's ignorance he didn't beg. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. Nagini struck. White-hot pain tore through him, blooming fast and merciless. The world folded inward. The shack tilted. His knees buckled. His blood hit the floor with a sound so soft it felt like betrayal. Shadows swam. Walls wavered, and the air thickened into something he could not breathe, and as the darkness tightened around him, a shape appeared in the doorway. Hesitant footfalls, a gasp, the heat of someone kneeling beside him. He didn't need sight to know who it was. He had known those footsteps and those eyes all his life. Harry, those green eyes, wide, horrified, and heartbreakingly familiar, cut through the dim haze, and Snape felt everything inside him lock into its final purpose. There was no room left for explanations, no breath left for confessions, no time to unravel 17 years of secrecy and sacrifice. So he gave Harry what he could, not words, not apologies, truth. His memories flooded forward in desperate threads, Lily laughing by the riverbank, his own teenage bitterness curdling into mistakes, the night he begged Dumbledore on broken knees, the vow forged in grief, the plan built on blood, and promises Harry had never known were made for him. Harry's hands trembled as Snape pressed the last pieces of his life into them, every ugly truth, every hidden choice, every moment spent living as villain, spy, shield, and shadow. No pleas, no defenses, just proof. His voice was barely more than breath when he spoke his last request. "Look at me." He only wanted one final second reflected in Lily's eyes. The eyes of the boy who would finish the war he had spent his life preparing him for. And when the darkness finally closed in, it felt less like a fall and more like release. Hogwarts letting go of a man who had carried too much, too long, in absolute silence. Dawn crept over the ruined castle with the strange quiet that follows catastrophe, a quiet that doesn't soothe, only waits. Smoke threaded through collapsed beams, stone smoldered. Somewhere, the dead were still being counted, and Harry Potter, soot-stained and blood-tired, stood with a vial of memories that felt heavier than any wand he had ever carried. He tipped the memories into the pensieve, and they didn't float toward him gently. They came like a collision. A boy caught between shouting parents and a house that never felt like home. Childhood carved out of neglect, bitterness, and too many corners to hide in. A friendship that became his lifeline. And Lily. She cared for him. She defended him. She tried to pull him back from the choices that were already consuming him. The letter Harry found in Grimmauld Place revealed everything Snape never said aloud. Lily filled those pages with warmth, small, bright pieces of her new life, a fond tease about James's endlessly untidy hair, the kind of gentle chaos she grew into without fear. She wrote with an ease that came from stepping into a world far removed from the shadows Snape was already drifting toward. Snape possessed only the torn bottom half, not by accident. He had taken it, her name, a photograph, holding on to fragments of a life she built, while he remained caught in the moment their paths split. Lily had been the one steady kindness in a childhood that offered him very little. For her, compassion was natural. For him, it had been rare enough to feel like salvation, that when the only warmth you've known disappears, the dark can start to look like direction. The Death Eater who begged for one woman's life, the protector who only stepped forward after she was gone, the teacher who wounded children in the same ways he'd been wounded, the secret guardian who saved others when no one was looking. Snape wasn't redeemed. He was exposed, complex, flawed, terrifyingly human. Hogwarts added his portrait, students whispered, scholars argued, and every debate circled the same uncomfortable truth. Snape's life was a tangle of brilliance, cruelty, devotion, and damage. Harry naming his son Severus wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. A mark of respect for a man who was neither noble nor gentle, but who made choices that mattered more than his intentions ever did. Snape died as complicated as he lived, shaped by obsession, sharpened by bitterness, driven by a loyalty that hurt as much as it healed. Severus Snape remains exactly where he lived his life. Some remember the professor who shielded them in silence. Others recall the bitterness, the cruelty, the prejudice he wielded like a second wand. His loyalty was messy, his love twisted, his courage carved from regret. He wasn't redeemed by death nor erased by sacrifice. His story simply refuses to flatten. Just a human being shaped by wounds he never outgrew and a promise he never escaped. Everything he was, everything he carried, narrows to the single word that defined him more than any spell or legacy ever could: always.